this topic is called as, that is unit number 1 that we are about to finish, is called as Humanism and Renaissance, wherein we have so far discussed the philosophy of humanism. We have also spoken about art and architecture. We haven't really spoken about, but art, we have spoken about the Trinity of Renaissance, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. And we've also slightly touched upon the literature part of it with Shakespeare as an example. What I intend to do is that I won't be discussing the architecture part and literature part in detail with you guys, but I want you to explore these online resources in such a fashion that it will enrich your understanding. But if you can't do that, then it will not harm your main exam-oriented question thing. So the question that I will be asking for your internal examination, it will deal with the philosophy of humanism and its expressions in the field of art and architecture and literature. But you can opt, if you want, you can simply opt to speak only about the field of art and not about architecture and literature, provided you don't have any access to good enough resources. If you have access to resources, which I believe you have since you are here on the Zoom call, then please go ahead and explore sources. I've shared a Excel sheet with you on WhatsApp. Also, it's hopefully on Moodle. If it's not, let me just remind me and I will put it there. So the Excel sheet has different links to various BBC documentaries or John Green's crash course in European history kind of a series, which will help you understand a few more things about especially architecture and literature. So that part I'm leaving for you to do on your own, but the remaining part, that is the philosophy of humanism and its expressions in the field of art as manifested through the Renaissance Trinity, that we have discussed so far. Okay, clear so far?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So today is what? Today is Wednesday.
Yes.
Wednesday.
Yes. Yes.
So either tomorrow or whenever you discuss with Rahul and Devkumar. So tomorrow onwards, I will be dealing with this other unit number 2, Protestant Reformation and Counter-Reformation. Okay. Today will be the last lecture of Renaissance, unit number 1. You know that this 3, 4, 5, 6, what are the units of this paper. This PPT, when I share, you will know that there are names of books that you can read. Also, I think Anushri has already shared a PDF file of a very short introduction to the Renaissance by OUP, that is Oxford University Press publication, on the WhatsApp group. If not, then just remind me. It's somewhere in my WhatsApp. I will share it again.
It's there.
Very short. It's there. Na? Great. Just reply to that somewhere on the WhatsApp group so that
yes,
you can go back. Thank you. So that's an excellent book. Very short introduction to the Renaissance. Similarly, there will be a very short introduction to Reformation, Enlightenment, so on and so forth. So please, if possible, if you can catch hold of those PDFs also, slowly, share them whenever we are teaching. Anushri, that's a request. Not
what is
only
it? Reformation and Enlightenment, you said, no, ma'am?
Yeah, Reformation and Enlightenment.
Okay.
Protestantism also, I think, or it may be titled as a very short introduction to the Protestant Reformation. I'm not very sure. Just Reformation.
Okay. I'll check.
Ma'am, it's Reformation and Enlightenment. म्हणजे Protestant Reformation आहे, Reformation आहे आणि Enlightenment आहे.
म्हणजे 2 separate books, only Reformation
and only Enlightenment. Yes.
Meet up then. I'll find it.
Thank you. Okay, then yeah, these books. Then we saw the geography of it all and what was the Roman Empire all about and how it got divided into Eastern and Western Roman Empire. And the importance of the Eastern Roman Empire becomes clear when we speak of the years when there is something called as the fall of Constantinople. We discussed various causes, various conditions that led to what came to be known as the Renaissance in the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. Conditions starting from the 13th, 14th centuries and Renaissance in 14th to 17th centuries in Europe. Then we also saw the underlying ideas and this background of feudalism and how it came feudalism, how it came to kind of make people aware that there is a world outside your little village and hamlet and little town. So the moment feudalism declines and the moment Renaissance processes begin, these two can't be really separated. So when people start going out of their places, out of their villages and towns for crusades or for voyages, that is the time period when their horizons start widening and then they start thinking in terms of interacting with different people, interacting with different ideas, negotiating with different kinds of linguistic groups and religious groups and so on and so forth. Basically, a widening of horizons happens simultaneously with the decline of the feudal system. All of these conditions are pointing towards a process which involves revival of classical learning and wisdom. Classical meaning Greek and Roman manifestations in the field of art, architecture, sculpture, literature, philosophy, science, and ideologies such as individualism, etc. So this whole thing, ideological cluster, as it were, is called as the Renaissance. Then we also saw that these are various, the ideologies that were revived eventually. We also saw that the Arabs had a great deal of contribution to make as far as the Renaissance is concerned. And also within Christianity, the methodology of scholasticism, wherein people start interpreting the texts using different techniques outlined over here. The contribution of the Arab thinkers cannot be really ignored in this whole process of the Renaissance. And we saw a number of examples, Avicenna being a very prominent one, but others as well. Like all these people outlined here. Ali ibn al-Abbas, Ibn Zur, so on and so forth. Then look at these pictures as examples of pre-Renaissance art also, where you can't really have an idea about the third dimension, what is deep, what is towards, at the forefront. What is the third dimension, the depth in a picture that cannot be seen in pictures like these, which are representative of pre-Renaissance art. And eventually when we go to see the paintings and portraits and frescoes by the Trinity, you will realize that one can get a sense of depth, third dimension in those pieces of art. Okay. We saw the role that crusades played in this whole, not just military exchanges, but ideological exchanges as well. And how from within the church, as scholasticism as a methodology developed, how from within the church there emerged challenges to the dogmatic understanding of Christianity. Also, we saw that the fall of Constantinople results in the exodus from Byzantium, that is Istanbul today, towards the capital of the erstwhile Western Roman Empire, that is Rome, where you have the Vatican and the Pope waiting with open arms for people, these men of learning who had fled the Byzantine Empire, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. So this is something that gives a great deal of a boost and impetus to revival of classical Greco-Roman texts and learning and ideas. Then we also saw that this period is coterminous with something that brings about a revolution in the field of communication of your message. Of course, there were books, there were manuscripts also, there were printed books also with block printing. Even before Johannes Gutenberg revolutionized the whole process. But the inventions that he brought in resulted in mass production of millions of books and the reaching of thoughts over the entire European continent. Yeah, number of books here. Then we also saw that there are results of, I mean, all of these are results also of the proliferation of vernacular literature. A prime example being Dante, who wrote his Divine Comedy in the Italian language and not in the classical, supposedly classical Latin or Greek language. He wrote in the Italian, that is his contemporary 13th century Italian language. Then talking of the criticism coming from within the church, we saw that Erasmus is somebody who's himself a priest, and still he goes ahead and says that the church is not the sole authority of certifying good qualities of people. Even if the church does not certify such and such person to be a nice person, a good person, a meritorious person, still the catalogue has many more names of saints than probably the church knows. That was his argument. That means there are people who may not be religious, who may not be known or recognized by the organized church, and still people are capable of being meritorious, being good human beings. He also attacked the various religious practices that are crept into the organized practice of Christianity. As a result of these various processes, people started having honest doubts. People started asking questions to organized church. The spirit of individualism also going on ahead with these rebellious thoughts, so to speak. Then all of this together has come to be known as humanism, and these are the various causes, or these are the various conditions which facilitate the ideology of humanism being so prominent in this period. First and foremost, there is trade and prosperity. Then people start widening their circle of social contacts, which was so far very constricting, very limited. And they also start having a great deal of interest in betterment of their life here and now, worldly affairs. Then these are some of the characteristic features of humanism that we've discussed, giving importance to individual experience. So what I feel, what I argue is important, is something that individualism tells us. All of these together, this idea that in the three binaries that we've discussed in the lectures, the three binaries being man and God, man and nature, man and society. In all these three binaries, man starts getting precedence around these centuries, because of which individual human experience becomes at the not becomes, it comes at the center of the thought processes. So the thinking, the ideologies, the expressions in the field of art, in the field of literature, all of them start having human beings at its center stage, as it were. So keeping humans at the center, the ideology comes to be known as humanism. Humanism. Yeah, human nature in all its manifestations becomes the chief subject, the focus of this ideology. We've also discussed the various effects that humanism had in the field of, especially in the field of art, but also in the field of thinking. People start asking questions, they start criticizing, they start asking questions such as what if I don't do this? What if I don't follow such and such stricture which is imposed on me by somebody? So asking of questions is a revolutionary activity that happens in this period. Vasari is the primary source material, the author who gives us the primary source material. We also saw the importance of De Medici family and their contribution in the whole bringing about of the Renaissance art and architecture. These are various examples that we saw of the Trinity of Renaissance. Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. And finally, we saw that Shakespeare is also, even if he is not counted among the Trinity, he is also one of the finest, arguably the finest, it's said, a literary figure in the English language. So he's written all these various plays and sonnets and poems. From the just purely Renaissance, that is rejuvenation of Greco-Roman ideals, from that spirit also we saw that many of the themes of his comedies, not comedies, tragedies especially, are from the Greco-Roman period. That is, you have Othello, you have this Julius Caesar, all those plays which deal with Greco-Roman themes. And finally, these are some of the, earlier also we've discussed, but these are some of the as yet undiscussed effects of Renaissance. That is, people started having a new idea, new conception, new understanding of what human life is all about, what the world is all about, as a result of the ideological upheavals of the Renaissance period. Then there is also the reconciliation between Christianity and classical civilization, meaning you know that earlier you have the Greek Empire, or the whatever, yeah, empire, then you have the Roman Empire, and then you have Christianity, which comes after defeating the Greco-Roman heritage and in a way really destroying the Greco-Roman heritage, Christianity in the early years, early centuries. But this is a period, Renaissance, when people have kind of moved away from those centuries, the early centuries of the Christian era, when in the 4th century you have Constantine, the emperor, embracing Christianity, and then Christianity from that period onwards starts becoming a major religion. Up until then, Christianity is not a very popular religion. This tussle between Christianity and pre-Christian religious and ideological practices of the Greco-Roman Empire, it kind of has a closure in the Renaissance, wherein people feel that, okay, we have moved away from those centuries and now we are distant enough to realize that all said and done, yes, the Christian rulers and emperors defeated the Greco-Roman Empire, but still we have ideologically inherited so many things from the Greco-Roman period that we cannot really simply wish away their presence. So a reconciliation happens between Christianity and the classical civilizations. Just the way, for example, we today have so many British things, even if we have politically moved away from the British people as colonial subjects. We are not a colony anymore, but still so many of our systems, our laws, our tastes, whether we drink tea or coffee, whether we play cricket or football, all these things are definitely influenced by British tastes. And this is something one has to make peace with, that okay, we were never ruled by the Dutch, for example. Otherwise, we would have appreciated a different kind of a sport. Then Renaissance period sees education changing a great deal. That is, universities, as we've already seen, start coming up. And we had earlier seen that around the 5th century AD, church began to have a great deal of influence on education. But with the establishment of university, again, secular education starts coming in. Yes, church is a major factor, but still complete control over what is to be imparted as education is not exerted by church anymore, starting off from the Renaissance period. Then there's the rise of vernacular literature. We saw that Shakespeare and even Dante earlier. These are writing in regional languages, not writing in classical Greco-Roman languages, and still they have a great deal of respect, a great deal of popularity also, and status also. So vernacular literature, it had always been there, but now it starts getting prestige also. Modern science and religious reform, these are things that we will be discussing when we are speaking of the scientific revolutions and Protestant Reformation. So I won't go into much of details, but enough here to say that religion starts introspecting. Organized church starts introspecting, looking at itself with a critical eye, because there is so much of criticism coming in from people like Erasmus. Modern science also, because of this whole interest in worldly affairs. So how to improve your life, hence new inventions, new discoveries, new machines being made, new technologies being invented. And there is also the counter-reformation, which I will not discuss here right now, because that will come when we speak about the Reformation. Okay, this is where your PPT for Renaissance ends. Okay, so I've stopped sharing the screen. How many minutes more remaining, Anushri, in this call? 15 to 2:40. 25 minutes.
10 minutes.
Only 10 minutes. Did you say 10?
Yes, ma'am, 10.
Okay, so I'll just get over with the English thing in the last 10 minutes, so that you don't have to come. You will anyway come for this one, for discussing things with Rahul and Devkumar. But anyway, I will continue in English for the next 10 minutes. Yeah, there's a great deal of discussion that happens about whether Renaissance is something that actually happened or it is only a figment of imagination. Something similar happens in case of the histories of all civilizations, all cultures, because people always like to give names to phenomena that have happened only afterwards. That is, only with hindsight. Hello? Only with hindsight do we name things as Renaissance or Indian freedom movement or Reformation or Enlightenment or American Revolution. When things are happening, people don't know, people don't, they are not conscious that we are going through something that is going to be called as the revolutionary period or the age of revolutions or whatever. So one thing is that when the Renaissance is reputed to have happened, people obviously were not aware that Renaissance is happening, one. Secondly, the objection is that how many people actually were affected by what we so gloriously appreciate as the Renaissance? And the answer to that is obviously uncomfortable, because it's not many people who whose lives were changed because Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa. So as far as the real day-to-day lives of, let's say, peasants or serfs or soldiers are concerned, over the period of the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, their lives did not get heavily influenced by the happenings of the Renaissance. That is objection number 2. Third objection that is raised against this idea of a concise Renaissance is that something happens over 3 centuries and you call it one phenomenon. That is ahistorical, because you take any 3 centuries in the history of the world and you are definitely going to find that people are reviving certain ideas and thoughts from the past, and they are making use of them in their present lives in such a fashion that this becomes relevant to their lives. So the objection is that what is the period when the Renaissance has not happened? Every century, every year, every single day. For example, we use the mixie to make chutney in the kitchen, but we also use the stone grinder sometimes if we feel like using it. So the technologies that we use, or we use the computer also, and we use the blackboard also. Technologies of an earlier era and of the present era, they coexist. Similarly, thoughts of an earlier era and thoughts of the present time period, they also coexist. So the objection is that, can you really name something that happened over a huge period of 3 or 4 centuries as a single process, especially when the people who are involved were not really aware of doing anything of that sort? So that is another objection that is leveled against the idea of a unified Renaissance. So first we saw that were common people affected by it, and the answer is no, especially in the field of art. Then the second objection was that it's too long a period of 3 centuries to say anything about it. And the third objection was that, what was it? I forgot. The one that I discussed before this.
Only in the hindsight is a phenomena named.
So it's only now that we realize that something like that has happened and we have named it. Yeah. And the fourth objection is that Renaissance is something that has been invented in order to kind of gloss over the oppressive present around us, as it were. So people have argued that there is always this process of invention of tradition that happens whenever whoever is the person who's writing, they feel that my surroundings are not very happy. I'm not very happy in these political, economic, whatever situation. So they go back to the past and try to make therapeutic use of the past. Past as therapy. So today I don't like my socio-political, cultural surroundings. So I will say, okay, today things are looking bad, but once upon a time, we had a great time called as Renaissance, called as the Golden Age, called as the whatever. So these are some of the arguments that are put forth to say that there is no such thing as Renaissance. What is it that we as students of history should do? We should simply try and understand both sides of the argument. One is that these are centuries when you see these fantastic manifestations in the field of art, architecture, so on and so forth. And the other side is that we cannot really label them as belonging to a specific school of thought or a specific cluster of ideas. So we'll just take both these arguments and try and perhaps explore more about them. We need not give the label also of Renaissance, or we are not going to benefit in any way by naming this period as the Renaissance, but it can be a very useful exercise to try and understand what are the linkages that we as Indian post-colonial, in your case millennials, what are the linkages that you can think of in your day-to-day lives with the period of 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries Europe. This will become evident especially as we go ahead with the various ideas, the ideologies that we discuss in unit number 6. There are so many things like democracy, individualism, this idea of humanism, which we practice today and which the roots of these things can be traced back to the centuries, 13, 14, 15, 16 centuries in Europe. So our ideological roots can be traced back to these centuries. That is something that is important for us. Whether we label it as Renaissance or whether we say there was no Renaissance, it's okay. Both ways of thinking, both ways of understanding the past are perfectly acceptable, but it's important for us to establish the connections between our present and a past which is a common cultural heritage. We should not harbor the idea that that is something that happened in Europe, so what connection it might have with my life. It's not like that. Our lives are very much intricately connected, even in those old centuries. So we'll stop here for the English medium. That is, lecture is over for English medium today. Do come back around 3:15. So when Rahul and Devkumar will come and discuss the class timings with you guys.
Okay, ma'am.
Any doubts about this?
No, ma'am. As you said, architecture we can read from the short introduction book, no?
Short introduction, online sources also, especially this Bruno Leski's idea of how to construct a dome. There are beautiful documentaries about that.
Okay, ma'am, I'll check. Thank you so much.
Any other doubts, questions? Zotan?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Then history department students come back at 3:15, 3:15. Huh?